The needle buzzed against the skin like a swarm of furious bees, but the man lying face down on the chair barely showed any sign of feeling the pain. Maggie's fingers moved with surgical precision, tracing thin lines of black ink on the stretched skin of the client. The studio smelled of antiseptic and sandalwood incense, a strange combination that she had learned to love over the last 6 years working in this basement in Portland, Oregon. The walls were covered with designs she had created, from traditional tribals to hyper-realistic portraits. But the work she was doing now was different. This wasn't art for display. It was coded information, secrets transformed into symbols that only a few could decipher. The man in the chair was the 5th client that week, who came with a specific request, a sequence of numbers disguised as a geometric pattern, coordinates hidden among elaborate mandalas. Maggie didn't ask questions. That was rule number 1 of her clandestine business. She tattooed what they asked for, memorized every line, every curve, every detail with her extraordinary photographic memory, and then pretended to forget. But she never forgot. Each tattoo was etched in her mind like a permanent photograph, a living archive of secrets she carried without ever intending to use. Hello, my name is Rachel Ashwood, and this is another story from our channel. If you're enjoying it so far, please subscribe to the channel so this story can reach more people. Leave your like, share, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Remember that this narration is fictional content created for entertainment. The night was particularly cold for early October in Portland, and the rain beat against the small basement window with monotonous insistence. Maggie wiped the excess ink from the client's skin and examined her work with critical eyes. The coordinates were perfectly hidden within the design of an elaborate compass rose, each petal containing a number, each line representing degrees and minutes of latitude and longitude. It was masterful work, and she knew it. The man stood up, examined the tattoo in the mirror, and nodded with approval. He was large, muscular, with scars that told stories of violence that Maggie preferred not to know. He paid in cash, as everyone did, worn $100 bills that he methodically counted on the table before leaving without saying a word, beyond a grunt of thanks. Maggie locked the door behind him and began cleaning her equipment, a ritual she performed with the same precision with which she tattooed. She sterilized the needles, cleaned the chair, threw away the disposable materials. It was almost midnight when she finally climbed the narrow stairs that led to her small apartment above the studio. The space was minimalist, almost Spartan, with only the essentials: a bed, a small kitchen, a bookshelf full of books on art and anatomy. Maggie had learned early on not to get attached to material things. Growing up in Oregon's social services system had taught her that everything could be taken away in an instant, so it was better to travel light, stay mobile, always be ready to disappear if necessary. She was making tea when she heard the noise. It wasn't the normal sound of rain or occasional traffic on the street. It was the unmistakable creak of someone trying to be silent and failing. Maggie froze, her hand still holding the kettle. Her heart began to race as she heard heavy footsteps climbing the basement stairs. She had been careful, always careful, never asking questions, never keeping records, never giving the wrong people a reason to look for her. But now someone was in her studio, and she was certain it wasn't a friendly visit. Maggie moved silently to the kitchen drawer, where she kept a sharp kitchen knife. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She positioned herself beside the door, breathing slowly, trying to calm the panic that threatened to consume her. The door opened with a violent kick that tore the lock from the frame. 3 men entered, all dressed in black, all with the posture and movements of people trained for violence. The one in front was older, maybe 50 years old, with graying hair and eyes cold as ice. He looked around the apartment with disdain before his eyes landed on Maggie, still holding the knife in a trembling hand. "Maggie Chen?" he said. And it wasn't a question. His voice was harsh, worn by years of cigarettes and shouting. "You're coming with us. Now." Maggie gripped the knife handle tighter, her brain working frantically to find a way out. There were no windows large enough to escape through, no back door, no place to run. She was trapped, and they knew it. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the terror she felt. "What do you want from me?" The older man smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile, only threat. "You did a job for a man 3 weeks ago. A specific job. We need to know what you tattooed on him and where he is now." Maggie felt her stomach sink. She tattooed dozens of people per month, but she knew exactly which job he was referring to. It had been a nervous man, sweating excessively despite the air conditioning, constantly looking at the door, as if expecting someone to enter at any moment. She had tattooed a complex map on his back, with markings that she had memorized instantly, but pretended to ignore. "I don't keep records," Maggie said, the lie sliding smoothly from her lips. "I do the work and forget. That's how I operate. That's why people come to me." The man took a step forward, and Maggie saw the gun tucked in his belt. "I don't believe you. You're going to tell us what we know you know, or we'll do this the hard way. And believe me, girl, you don't want the hard way." Before Maggie could respond, before she could think about running or fighting or begging, the apartment window exploded in a shower of glass. Someone entered like a hurricane, moving so fast that Maggie could barely process what she was seeing. The newcomer was tall, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than 6 months of Maggie's rent, and he moved with a lethal grace that made the 3 intruders seem clumsy in comparison. Within seconds, 2 of the men were on the floor, one with his arm twisted at an impossible angle, the other unconscious with blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. The older man managed to draw his gun, but the newcomer was faster, disarming him with a fluid movement and pressing the barrel of the man's own gun against his temple. "You have 5 seconds to tell me who sent you." The newcomer's voice was low, controlled, but loaded with an authority that admitted no disobedience. The older man swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear. "We work for the Russos. They want the girl. She knows where Tommy hid their money." "Wrong," the newcomer said calmly. "She works for me now. Tell the Russos that if they touch her again, I will personally visit every member of their family, starting with Nikolai." He released the man, who fell to his knees, trembling. The 3 intruders dragged themselves out of the apartment, the unconscious man being half carried, half dragged by the other 2. And then Maggie was alone with her savior, who turned to face her with eyes so dark they looked black in the apartment's dim light. "Are you okay?" he asked, and Maggie realized she was still holding the knife, her fingers white around the handle. She placed it on the counter with trembling hands and nodded, not trusting her voice. "My name is Alec Donovan," he said, adjusting his shirt cuffs as if he hadn't just incapacitated 3 armed men in a matter of seconds. "And you, Maggie Chen, have something I need." Maggie found her voice, though it came out weaker than she would have liked. "I don't know anything. I just tattoo what people ask me to. I don't ask questions. I don't keep records." He smiled, and it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's what you tell everyone, but we both know that's not true. You have a photographic memory. You remember every tattoo you've ever done, every line, every symbol, every detail. You're a living archive of secrets, Maggie, and I need to access that archive." Maggie's blood ran cold. How did he know about her memory? She had kept that secret carefully, never telling anyone, using it only for her own benefit. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Alec took a step closer, and Maggie found herself backing up until her back hit the kitchen counter. 3 weeks ago, you tattooed a man named Tommy Marconi. He had a map on his back, coordinates hidden in a compass and stars design. This man killed my father 2 years ago and disappeared with $3 million that belonged to my family. I need to find him, and you're the only person who can tell me where he is." Maggie looked at Alec Donovan, really looked at him for the first time. He was young, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair combed back and an angular jaw that seemed carved from stone. There was a thin scar running along his left cheek, almost invisible but present, a reminder of some past violence. He was handsome in a dangerous way, the kind of man that mothers warned their daughters to avoid. And by the 3 men he had just defeated without apparent effort, he was exactly as dangerous as he looked. "If I help you," Maggie said slowly, "what happens to me afterward? The Russos will come back, and probably others too. I can't stay here." "You're right," Alec agreed. "That's why you're coming with me. I'll protect you while you help me find Tommy. And after I recover what's mine, I'll make sure you have a new identity, a new start anywhere you want. Away from Portland, away from the Russos, away from everyone who might want to use you." Maggie wanted to believe him, but years of living in the shadows had taught her not to trust easy promises. "And if I refuse?" Alec tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made Maggie feel exposed, vulnerable. "Then the Russos will find you eventually, and when they do, they won't be as gentle as I'm being. They'll torture you until you tell them everything you know, and then they'll kill you to make sure you never tell anyone else. Your only chance of surviving is with me." It wasn't really a choice, and they both knew it. Maggie looked around her small apartment, at the life she had carefully built over the years, and knew that all of it had ended the moment Tommy Marconi had walked into her studio 3 weeks ago. "How much time do I have to pack?" she asked, her voice resigned. Alec checked his watch, a Rolex that probably cost more than Maggie's car. 5 minutes. Bring only the essentials. We're leaving Portland tonight." Maggie moved quickly, throwing clothes into a backpack, grabbing her important documents from a hiding place behind the bookshelf, storing the money she kept in a coffee can in the kitchen cabinet. 5 minutes later, she was standing at the door of her apartment, looking back one last time at the only place that had felt like home. "Ready?" Alec asked, and Maggie nodded, following him down the stairs and out into the rainy Portland night. A black SUV was parked on the street, with tinted windows and the engine running. Alec opened the back door for Maggie, and she hesitated only a moment before getting in. The interior smelled of expensive leather and men's cologne. There was another man in the driver's seat, older than Alec, with broad shoulders and an expression that revealed nothing. "This is Connor," Alec said, sliding into the seat next to Maggie. "He's my head of security and the person I trust most in the world. Connor will take us to a safe place where we can talk properly." Connor nodded to Maggie through the rearview mirror and put the car in motion. They drove in silence through the wet streets of Portland, passing bars still open and restaurants closing, homeless people huddled in store entrances, and couples running through the rain. Maggie watched it all pass by the window, wondering if she would ever see this city again. They drove for almost an hour, leaving the city and entering the wooded hills surrounding Portland. Finally, Connor turned onto a private road that wound through tall pines before opening into a clearing where a modern house of glass and steel was situated. It was spectacular, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the mountains in the distance. Alec helped Maggie out of the car and guided her inside the house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior, with minimalist furniture, modern art on the walls, and cutting-edge technology in every corner. There were security cameras discreetly positioned, motion sensors on the windows, and Maggie noticed at least 3 men patrolling the perimeter through the windows. "Welcome to my home," Alec said, taking off his coat and throwing it over a chair. "You're safe here. No one enters or leaves without my permission. Connor will show you your room. Rest a bit. We'll talk in the morning." Maggie followed Connor down a long hallway to a guest room that was larger than her entire Portland apartment. There was a king-size bed with immaculate white sheets, a private bathroom with a huge bathtub, and more windows offering views of the forest. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit," Connor said. His voice was deep and rough. "If you need anything, there's an intercom on the wall." Someone is always awake. Thank you, Maggie said, and Connor nodded before leaving, closing the door softly behind him. Maggie stood alone in the luxurious room, feeling completely out of place. She took a long, hot shower, letting the water wash away the fear and adrenaline of the day, and then slipped into the soft bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept returning to Tommy Marconi and the tattoo she had done on him. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to check out our ebook collection, Dangerous Obsession, a collection with adult stories pinned in the comments and on the QR code on the screen. These are intense and engaging narratives that will captivate you from beginning to end. Maggie remembered Tommy perfectly, as she remembered all her clients. He had been nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder, his hands trembling as he showed her the design he wanted. It was complex, an elaborate compass surrounded by constellations, but Maggie had immediately seen the numbers hidden within the design. Coordinates, latitude and longitude. A map to somewhere Tommy wanted to remember but couldn't risk writing down. She had tattooed the coordinates carefully, each number perfectly formed, each line precise. And then, as she always did, she had memorized everything. The coordinates were etched in her mind as clearly as if they were written on paper in front of her. 45 degrees, 32 minutes north. 121 degrees, 48 minutes west. Somewhere in the Oregon mountains, she supposed. Probably remote. Probably difficult to reach. A perfect place to hide $3 million. Maggie finally fell asleep as the sky began to lighten, and woke up with the sun already high, light filtering through the thin curtains. She dressed in the clothes Connor had mentioned, jeans that fit perfectly, and a soft t-shirt, and left the room. The house was silent, but she could hear voices coming from somewhere ahead. She followed the sound to a huge kitchen where Alec was sitting at the table, drinking coffee and reading something on a tablet. He looked up when Maggie entered, and something in his expression softened slightly. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, and Maggie shrugged. "Considering my life was turned upside down last night, I slept reasonably well." Alec smiled, a genuine smile this time that transformed his entire face. "Coffee," he offered, pushing a mug toward her. "And there's food if you're hungry. Connor makes the best scrambled eggs you've ever tasted." Maggie accepted the coffee gratefully and sat at the table. "So," she said, "let's get straight to the point. You want me to tell you where Tommy Marconi is. And in return, you'll give me a new identity and a new start." Alec nodded. "Exactly. But there's more to it than that. Tommy isn't just hiding somewhere with the money. He's working with someone powerful enough to keep him hidden from the Russos and from me for the last 2 years. I need to know who that someone is. And I suspect you might have information about that too." Maggie frowned. "How would I know that?" "Because you didn't just tattoo Tommy," Alec said, leaning forward. "In the last 2 years, you've tattooed at least a dozen people connected to the organization I'm looking for. Small jobs. Nothing that called attention individually, but together they form a pattern. You're the only connection between all these people, Maggie. You're the key to dismantling the entire operation." Maggie's stomach churned. She had been so careful, so discreet, but apparently not careful enough. "I don't want to be involved in this," she said quietly. "I just want to live my life in peace." "I know," Alec said, and there was something like sympathy in his voice. "But you don't have a choice now. The Russos know about you. My enemies know about you. The only way for you to be safe is to help me finish this once and for all." Maggie took a sip of coffee, letting the hot liquid calm her frayed nerves. "And if I help you, and you get what you want, how do I know you'll keep your end of the deal? How do I know you won't just kill me to make sure I never tell your secrets to anyone?" Alex studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes impossible to read. "You don't know," he said finally. "You'll have to trust me. I know I haven't given you many reasons to trust, but I'm giving you my word. Help me find Tommy and dismantle this organization, and I'll make sure you have the life you deserve. Away from all this." Maggie wanted to believe him. There was something about Alec Donovan, despite his obvious dangerousness, despite the violence he was clearly capable of, that made her want to trust him. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were a person and not just a tool. Maybe it was the fact that he had saved her life the night before, when he could easily have let the Russos take her. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to cling to any hope of escaping the mess her life had become. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll help you. But I want your promise, Alec. Your word that when this is over, I go free." "You have my word," Alec said, extending his hand across the table. Maggie shook it, feeling the strength in his fingers, the warmth of his skin. "So let's begin," Alec said, releasing her hand and picking up the tablet. "Tell me everything you remember about Tommy Marconi and the tattoo you did on him." Maggie closed her eyes, letting her photographic memory bring the image forward. She could see Tommy in her mind as clearly as if he were sitting in front of her. Every detail of his face, his clothes, his nervous hands. And she could see the tattoo, every line, every number, every symbol. "It was a compass," Maggie began, opening her eyes. "About 8 inches in diameter, centered between his shoulder blades. The compass had 8 points, and at each point there was a different constellation. Ursa Major, Orion, Cassiopeia, the others I didn't recognize. But the numbers were hidden in the stars. Coordinates." Alec was typing rapidly on the tablet as she spoke. "What were the coordinates?" 45 degrees, 32 minutes, 15 seconds north," Maggie recited, the numbers flowing from her memory effortlessly. 121 degrees, 48 minutes, 30 seconds west. Alec stopped typing and looked at her with an expression of amazement. "You remember that with such precision? Down to the seconds." "I remember everything," Maggie said simply. "Every tattoo, every client, every conversation. It's a blessing and a curse." Alec returned his attention to the tablet, his fingers flying over the screen as he entered the coordinates into some kind of mapping software. After a moment, he turned the tablet so Maggie could see. "Do you recognize this place?" Maggie looked at the satellite image on the screen. It was a densely wooded area in the mountains, with what appeared to be a small cabin or structure in the center of a clearing. "No," she said. "I've never been there. I didn't even know it was a real place until now." "It's real," Alec confirmed. "And it's remote. The nearest road is 5 miles away. Perfect for someone who wants to disappear." He looked at Maggie, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart race. "We're going to need to go there. Personally, and you're going to need to come with me." "Why?" Maggie asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because there may be more codes there," Alec said. "More information hidden that only you would be able to recognize and decipher. And because I don't trust leaving you here alone where my enemies can find you. You stay with me, where I can protect you." Maggie wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't a child who needed constant protection. But the truth was, she was scared. The events of the previous night had made clear how dangerous her situation really was. If staying with Alec meant staying alive, then she would stay with Alec. "When do we leave?" she asked. "This afternoon," Alec responded. "Connor is preparing supplies now. It's going to be a difficult hike to the cabin, and we don't know what we'll find when we get there. Tommy might be there, or he might have left traps. We need to be prepared for anything." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparations. Connor appeared with backpacks full of supplies, hiking clothes, camping equipment, and Maggie noticed weapons. Many weapons. Alec spent the time making phone calls, his voice low and urgent as he coordinated with people Maggie assumed were part of his organization. She caught fragments of conversations, references to territory, loyalty, revenge. It became clear that Alec Donovan wasn't just a wealthy man with resources. He was someone with power, with influence, with a network of people who responded to his commands. He was, Maggie realized with a shiver, exactly the kind of man she had spent years avoiding, and now her life was completely in his hands. By noon, they were ready to leave. Maggie put on the hiking clothes Connor had provided, sturdy boots that fit surprisingly well, and followed Alec to the SUV. Connor was in the driver's seat again, and there was another man in the passenger seat, younger, with blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that assessed Maggie with professional interest. "This is Tyler," Alec said as they settled into the back seat. "He's our tracking and wilderness survival specialist. If there are traps at the cabin, Tyler will find them before they find us." Tyler nodded to Maggie with a smile that was more predatory than friendly. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. "Alec says you have a perfect memory. Must be useful in your line of work." "It has its moments," Maggie responded cautiously. She didn't like the way Tyler looked at her, as if she were an interesting puzzle he was eager to solve. The trip to the mountains took 3 hours, the last 2 on increasingly precarious dirt roads that made the SUV rattle and shake. Finally, Connor stopped in an area where the road simply ended, swallowed by the dense forest. "From here, we go on foot," Alec announced, getting out of the car and grabbing his backpack. "It's about 5 miles to the coordinates. If we keep a good pace, we should get there before nightfall." They started walking, Tyler in front, followed by Alec and Maggie, with Connor bringing up the rear. The forest was dense and humid, the air heavy with the smell of pines and wet earth. Maggie wasn't used to this kind of physical activity, and soon her muscles were protesting, her legs burning with the effort of climbing the steep incline. But she refused to complain, refused to ask to stop. She wasn't going to be the weak one in the group. After 2 hours of walking, Tyler raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. "There are footprints here," he said, crouching to examine the ground. "Recent, maybe 2 or 3 days. Someone's been here." "How many people?" Alec asked, moving to stand beside Tyler. "At least 3, Tyler responded. "Maybe more. And they were carrying weight. You can see how deep the footprints are. Probably weapons and supplies." Alec exchanged a look with Connor, and Maggie saw something pass between them, some silent communication born of years working together. "We continue," Alec decided, but carefully. "Tyler, you lead. Connor, watch our rear. And Maggie?" He turned to her, his expression serious. "You stay close to me. No matter what happens, you don't leave my side." "Understood." Maggie nodded, her heart beating faster now with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. They continued, moving more slowly now, each step deliberate and silent. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees so dense they blocked most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight that made every shadow seem threatening. Maggie found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting to see someone emerging from the trees behind them. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably just another hour, Tyler stopped again. "There," he whispered, pointing through the trees. Maggie followed his finger and saw the clearing from the satellite images, and in the center of it, the cabin. It was small, made of logs weathered by time, with a rusted metal roof and windows covered with boards. It looked abandoned, but Maggie could see signs of recent activity, footprints in the mud around the door, a pile of firewood that looked fresh, faint smoke rising from the chimney. "Someone's there," Connor murmured, and Maggie heard the soft click of a gun being unlocked. Alec made a gesture with his hand, and suddenly everyone was moving, spreading out around the clearing in a coordinated pattern that spoke of training and practice. Maggie stayed where she was, pressed against a large tree, her heart pounding so loud she was sure anyone in the cabin could hear it. Alec approached the front door, moving with the silent grace of a predator. He tried the doorknob, found it unlocked, and pushed the door open with his foot as he entered with his gun raised. Maggie held her breath, waiting for gunshots, screams, some sign of violence. But there was only silence. After a moment that seemed to stretch forever, Alec appeared in the doorway and waved to the others. "It's empty," he called. "But someone's been here recently. Very recently." Maggie came out from behind the tree and crossed the clearing on trembling legs. Inside the cabin, it was Spartan but functional. There was a bed in one corner, a wood stove, a table with chairs, shelves lined with cans of food and bottles of water. And on the walls, maps, dozens of them, covered with markings and annotations in handwriting that Maggie didn't recognize. Alec was studying the maps, his eyes scanning the markings with fierce intensity. "This is," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "This is everything. Transportation routes, storage locations, contact names." Tommy was documenting the entire operation. "Which means," Connor asked, checking the cabinets. "It means Tommy wasn't just hiding the money," Alec responded. "He was building a dossier, evidence, probably planning to use it as leverage or insurance." He turned to Maggie. "You need to see this. Memorize everything." Maggie approached, looking at the maps with growing apprehension. There was so much, so many details, so much information. But her photographic memory was already working, capturing each map, each annotation, each marking. She could feel the information being recorded in her brain, permanent and indelible. "It will take time," she said. "There's a lot here." "We have time," Alec started to say, but was interrupted by the sound of vehicle engines approaching. Connor ran to the window, peeking through a crack in the boards. "3 trucks," he reported, his voice tense. "At least a dozen men. They're armed." "The Russos?" Tyler asked, checking his own gun. "No," Connor said, and there was something like fear in his voice, something Maggie didn't expect to hear from this tough man. "Worse. It's Dmitry Volkov's organization, and they're surrounding the cabin." The name Dmitry Volkov meant nothing to Maggie, but the reaction of the men around her said everything she needed to know. "Who is Dmitry Volkov?" she asked, her voice coming out higher than intended. "The most dangerous man on the West Coast," Alec responded, his jaw tight. "He controls everything. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. My father was trying to put him out of business when he was killed. And apparently Tommy was working for Volkov all along. So we're trapped," Maggie said, panic rising in her throat. "They're going to kill us." "Not if I can help it," Alec said, and there was a fierce determination in his voice that made Maggie believe him, despite the impossible odds. "Connor, Tyler, prepare for a siege. Maggie," he grabbed her arm, pulling her close. "You stay in the center of the cabin, away from the windows. No matter what happens, you stay alive. Understood." Before Maggie could respond, a voice called from outside, amplified by a megaphone. "Alec Donovan. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up, and maybe we'll let you live." Alec didn't respond, just checked his gun and exchanged a look with Connor. They knew that going out meant certain death. Staying inside meant a siege they probably couldn't win. But at least inside they had cover. They had a chance to fight. The first shots exploded through the boarded windows, wood splinters flying as bullets pierced the cabin's thin walls. Maggie screamed and threw herself to the floor, covering her head with her hands. Around her, Alec and his men returned fire, the sound deafening in the confined space. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, acrid and suffocating. The firefight seemed to last an eternity, though it was probably only minutes. When it finally stopped, Maggie cautiously raised her head. Connor was reloading his gun. Tyler was checking a superficial wound on his arm, and Alec was beside the window, peeking outside. "They're retreating," Alec reported, but his voice had no relief. "Probably regrouping for another attack. We need to get out of here before they come back with reinforcements." "How?" Maggie asked, standing up on trembling legs. "We're surrounded." "There's a back exit," Connor said, pointing to what Maggie had thought was just a solid wall. "Tyler and I checked when we entered. It leads to a tunnel, probably an escape route Tommy built. We don't know where it goes, but it's better than staying here." "Then let's go," Alec decided. "Maggie, grab as many of those maps as you can carry. Connor, Tyler, cover our retreat." They moved quickly, Maggie tearing maps from the walls and stuffing them into her backpack while the men prepared their escape. Connor found the hidden mechanism that opened the back wall, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Flashlights lit, they descended, the secret door closing behind them with a soft click. The tunnel was tight and damp, the dirt walls supported by wooden beams that looked dangerously fragile. They moved in single file, Alec leading with Maggie right behind him, his hand occasionally touching her back to guide her in the darkness. Behind them, Maggie could hear muffled sounds, more gunshots, screams, the sound of something heavy hitting the cabin. Volkov's men had discovered they had fled and were furious. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, twisting and turning, sometimes so low they had to crouch, other times opening into larger chambers where Tommy had apparently stored supplies. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, they saw light ahead. The tunnel exit was hidden behind a curtain of vines and bushes, opening into a steep ravine several miles from the cabin. They emerged, blinking in the setting sunlight, and Alec immediately began assessing their situation. "We need to move fast," he said. "Volkov will have men searching for us, and we can't go back to where we left the car. They'll be waiting there." "So, where do we go?" Maggie asked, exhausted and scared, and wanting nothing more than to be somewhere safe and warm. "There's a town about 10 miles east," Connor said, checking a portable GPS. "Small, but it should have a hotel where we can spend the night and regroup." They started walking again, moving as fast as the rugged terrain allowed. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the forest, and Maggie knew that once it got completely dark, navigation would be almost impossible. Her feet ached, her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she kept going, refusing to be the one who slowed them down. Alec stayed close to her throughout the walk, his presence constant and comforting. Occasionally he offered his hand to help her over a fallen log or a stream, and Maggie found herself accepting gratefully, appreciating the strength and warmth of his touch. There was something developing between them, she realized, something beyond simple need and circumstance. She was beginning to trust him, maybe even like him, and that scared her almost as much as the armed men pursuing them. It was completely dark when they finally spotted the town lights through the trees. It was small, as Connor had said, little more than a main street with a few shops and a worn hotel. But to Maggie, it looked like paradise. They checked into the hotel using fake identities that Connor produced from somewhere. And Maggie found herself in a small but clean room with a bed that seemed like the most comfortable thing she had ever seen. Alec was in the room next door, with Connor and Tyler sharing a third room down the hall. "Rest," Alec told her before going to his own room. "We'll talk in the morning about our next steps. But for now, you're safe." Maggie locked the door behind him and fell onto the bed, still fully dressed. She should shower, should eat something, but she was too exhausted to do either of those things. She fell asleep almost instantly, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to a soft knock on the door. It took a moment to orient herself, to remember where she was and why. Sunlight was coming through the thin curtain, and her phone showed it was almost 10 in the morning. She had slept for almost 12 hours. "Maggie," Alec's voice came through the door. "Are you awake?" "I am," she called back, her voice hoarse from sleep. "Give me a minute." She dragged herself out of bed and into the bathroom, washing her face and trying to do something with her hair. She was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, dirty and wrinkled, but they would have to do. When she opened the door, Alec was waiting in the hallway with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like something delicious. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, offering her a coffee and the bag. "They're just sandwiches from the diner down the street." but it's better than nothing." "Thank you," Maggie said, accepting gratefully. They sat on the small patio outside her room, eating in comfortable silence as the morning sun warmed them. Maggie realized this was the first time she and Alec were really alone, without Connor or Tyler, or some immediate threat demanding their attention. "We need to talk about what happens next," Alec said finally, finishing his sandwich and leaning back in his chair. "The maps you took from the cabin, did you memorize them?" Maggie nodded. "Most of them, yes. There's a lot of information. It will take time to process everything. But it's all here." She touched her temple, recorded. Alec studied her for a long moment. "You realize what this means, don't you? You now know more about Volkov's organization than probably anyone alive besides Volkov himself. That makes you incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. To him and to me." Maggie felt a shiver of fear run down her spine. "Are you going to kill me now, after I give you all the information? It's what would make sense, right? Eliminate the witness." To her surprise, Alec looked genuinely shocked at the suggestion. "No," he said firmly. "I gave you my word, Maggie. When this is over, you go free. I don't go back on my word." "But," he hesitated, and Maggie saw something like conflict in his eyes. "I would like you to consider staying. Not as a prisoner, not as a tool, but as a partner. You have skills I could use, and I could offer protection and resources you would never have on your own." Maggie looked at him, trying to read the expression on his face. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a choice," Alec corrected. "A chance to use your talents for something more than just surviving. Help me take down Volkov. Help me clean up the streets of this city, and I guarantee you'll never have to hide again. You'll have protection, resources, a purpose." It was tempting, Maggie had to admit. The idea of not being alone anymore, of having someone by her side, of using her skills for something that really mattered. But it was also scary. Entering Alec's world meant embracing the violence and danger she had spent years avoiding. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a lot to process." Alec nodded, accepting her answer. "Take the time you need. But know that the offer is open, no matter what you decide." They spent the rest of the day at the hotel, Connor making contact with other members of Alec's organization, Tyler doing reconnaissance of the area to ensure they hadn't been followed. Maggie spent the time transcribing the maps from her memory, drawing them on paper Connor had bought, noting every detail she could remember. It was tedious work, but she found herself getting into a rhythm, her hand moving automatically while her mind replayed the images stored in her memory. Alec checked on her periodically, bringing food and coffee, sometimes just sitting in silence while she worked. His presence was comforting, and Maggie found herself appreciating these quiet moments, this sense of partnership and shared purpose. By evening, she had transcribed most of the maps, stacks of paper covering the bed and table in her room. Alec studied them with growing excitement, his eyes gleaming as he saw the full scope of Volkov's operation revealed before him. "This is incredible," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You're incredible, Maggie. You know that." Maggie felt her face warm with the compliment. "It's just my memory. It's nothing special." "It's everything special," Alec insisted, looking up from the maps to look at her. "You're special. And I—" He hesitated, and Maggie saw vulnerability in his eyes, something she didn't expect to see in this tough, dangerous man. "I'm glad our paths crossed, even if it was under terrible circumstances." Maggie felt something tighten in her chest, an emotion she couldn't name. "Me too," she said softly, and realized it was true. Despite the danger, despite the fear, despite everything, she was glad to have met Alec Donovan. The moment was broken by Connor knocking on the door. "Alec, we need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." Alec sighed and stood up, giving Maggie an apologetic look before following Connor into the hallway. Maggie could hear them talking in low, urgent tones, but couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes, Alec returned, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he said. "Connor received information that Volkov knows we're here. He's sending a team to get us. We need to move now." Maggie felt the familiar fear tighten her throat. "Where do we go?" "Back to Portland," Alec said, already grabbing the maps and stuffing them into a backpack. "To my house. It's the safest place I know, and we need this information to plan our next move." They left the hotel through the back exit, Connor having already paid the bill and retrieved their belongings. There was a different car waiting, a discreet sedan that wouldn't attract attention, and they left into the night, driving fast but not fast enough to attract police attention. The trip back to Portland was tense, everyone constantly looking in the rearview mirrors, expecting to see headlights chasing them. But the road remained empty, and after 3 hours of driving, they arrived back at Alec's house in the hills. Maggie never thought she would be happy to see that place again, but when they passed through the security gates and drove up the driveway, she felt something like relief. Here, surrounded by Alec's security and his men, she could breathe a little easier. In the following days, they worked tirelessly, using the information from the maps to build a comprehensive case against Volkov. Alec had contacts in the police, honest detectives who were as eager as he was to bring down Volkov's criminal empire. But they needed solid evidence, and Maggie's information provided exactly that. She worked side by side with Alec, her photographic memory proving invaluable as she remembered details that not even the maps contained. Conversations she had overheard while tattooing clients, names mentioned casually, locations discussed in low voices. All of it was stored in her brain, waiting to be accessed. And as they worked, something else developed between her and Alec. It started with casual touches, his hand on the small of her back as he passed, their fingers brushing as they reached for the same paper. Then came the looks, moments when their eyes met and held, silent communication passing between them. And finally, late one night when they were alone in the office, surrounded by maps and documents, Alec kissed her. It was soft at first, hesitant, as if he was giving her the chance to pull away. But Maggie didn't pull away. She leaned into the kiss, her hands rising to tangle in his hair, her body pressing against his. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, years of loneliness and fear melting under the heat of his touch. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "I shouldn't have done that," Alec said, his forehead resting against hers. "You're under my protection. I shouldn't take advantage." "You're not taking advantage," Maggie interrupted him. "I wanted this. I want you." She saw something ignite in his eyes, something dark and possessive that should have scared her, but instead made her feel desired, valued. "Maggie," he said, his voice hoarse. "If we start this, there's no going back. You understand that? Once you're mine, I don't let go." "Good," Maggie said, pulling him back for another kiss. "Because I don't want you to let me go." That night marked a shift in their relationship. They still worked together during the day, still planned and strategized, and built their case against Volkov. But at night, they met in Alec's room, exploring this new connection between them, learning each other's bodies, finding comfort and passion in each other's arms. Maggie had never felt this way before, so completely seen and accepted. Alec knew her secrets, knew her fears, and still wanted her. And she found that she wanted him too, not just physically, but emotionally. She wanted to be by his side, wanted to be his partner in every sense of the word. 2 weeks after their escape from the cabin, they were ready. Alec had coordinated with his contacts in the police, and a massive operation was planned to dismantle Volkov's organization. It would be dangerous, Alec warned Maggie. Volkov wouldn't go down without a fight, and there would be violence. But if they succeeded, it would be the end of his reign of terror over the city. "I want to be there," Maggie said. "When you make the move against Volkov, I want to be there." Alec immediately shook his head. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. You'll stay here, where you're safe." "I'm not a child," Maggie argued, her voice firm. "And I'm not helpless. You've taught me to shoot over the last 2 weeks, taught me to defend myself. Let me be part of this. Let me help finish what we started." Alex studied her for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he sighed. "You stay with Connor at all times. You don't leave his side, no matter what happens." "Understood." "Understood," Maggie agreed, and saw pride flash in Alex's eyes. The operation was scheduled for a Friday night, when Volkov would be at his main club in downtown Portland. The police would surround the building while Alex's team entered through the front, forcing Volkov into a position where he would have no choice but to surrender or fight. Maggie was nervous as she prepared that night, wearing the bulletproof vest Alec had insisted she wear, checking the small gun Connor had given her. She didn't want to use it, hoped she wouldn't have to use it, but it was comforting to know it was there. Alec came to her before they left, pulling her into a tight embrace. "If something goes wrong," he said in her ear, "you run. You don't try to be a hero, you don't try to save me. You just run and let Connor get you out of there. Promise me." "I promise," Maggie said, though they both knew it was a lie. If Alec was in danger, she wouldn't run. She couldn't. Volkov's club was an elegant building of glass and steel in Portland's warehouse district, with lines of people waiting to get in and security guards checking IDs at the door. But Alec and his team didn't use the front entrance. They entered through the back, through a delivery entrance that Maggie's information had revealed, moving silently through service corridors until they reached the main office where Volkov conducted his business. The door was locked, but Tyler made quick work of it. And then they were inside, guns raised, confronting Dmitry Volkov across his enormous desk. Volkov was older than Maggie expected, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and cold eyes that assessed her with clinical interest. "So you're the tattoo artist," he said, his voice carrying a heavy Russian accent. "The girl with the perfect memory. I've heard a lot about you." "It's over, Volkov," Alec said, his gun steady and pointed at the older man's chest. "The police are surrounding the building. Your men are being arrested as we speak. You have nowhere to go." Volkov smiled, and it was a smile that made Maggie's blood run cold. "You think I didn't prepare for this possibility. You think I don't have contingency plans." He pressed a button under his desk, and suddenly alarms were sounding, red lights flashing. Steel doors descended, sealing the office, trapping them inside. And then, from hidden panels in the walls, more men emerged, all armed, all pointing guns at Alec and his team. "You walked into my trap," Volkov said, his smile widening, "and now you're all going to die here." What happened next was chaos. Gunshots exploded from all directions, the sound deafening in the confined space. Connor pushed Maggie behind a heavy desk, covering her with his body as bullets ricocheted around them. She could see Alec and Tyler fighting, their movements a coordinated dance of violence as they took down Volkov's men one by one. But there were too many of them, and more kept coming. Maggie saw Alec take a shot to the shoulder, saw him stagger but keep fighting, his determination fierce and unwavering. She saw Tyler fall, a red stain spreading across his shirt, though he kept shooting from his position on the floor. And she saw Volkov, moving toward a hidden door in the back wall, escaping while his men died around him. "No!" Maggie screamed, pushing Connor away and running after Volkov. She heard him shout her name, heard Alec scream for her to stop, but she didn't stop. She couldn't let Volkov escape, not after everything they had been through. She reached the hidden door just as Volkov was passing through it and threw herself after him, her fingers grabbing his jacket. He turned with a snarl, his hand closing around her throat, lifting her off the ground with surprising strength for a man his age. "Stupid girl," he spat, his fingers tightening, cutting off her air. "You should have stayed hidden. Now you're going to die like all the others." Maggie's vision began to darken, spots dancing before her eyes. She clawed at Volkov's hands, but he was too strong, his grip relentless. And then she remembered the gun, the small gun Connor had given her. With trembling fingers, she reached for it, pulling it from its holster. Volkov saw the movement and laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "You don't have the courage," he mocked. "You're just an artist, not a killer." He was wrong. Maggie pressed the barrel of the gun against his stomach and pulled the trigger. The shot was muffled, absorbed by Volkov's body, but the effect was immediate. He released her, staggering backward, his hands pressing the wound as blood flowed between his fingers. Maggie fell to the floor, coughing and gasping, her throat on fire. She heard heavy footsteps, and then Alec was there, pulling her into his arms, checking her for injuries. "Are you okay?" he asked urgently, his hands running over her face, her neck. "Maggie, talk to me." "I'm okay," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. "Volkov, he's finished," Alec said, looking to where Volkov had fallen, Connor and several police officers already surrounding him. "It's over, Maggie. You did it. You got him." The following weeks were a blur of police statements and testimonies, newspaper headlines proclaiming the fall of Volkov's empire, Maggie being hailed as a hero and key witness. But through it all, Alec was by her side, his presence constant and comforting. Tyler recovered from his injuries, as did Alec, though he carried his arm in a sling for several weeks. And slowly, life began to settle into a new normal. Maggie didn't return to her tattoo studio in Portland. That life was over, and she was ready for something new. She accepted Alec's offer, becoming his partner in every sense of the word. She used her photographic memory to help him manage his legitimate businesses, to identify threats and opportunities, to build something better than the criminal empire his father had left behind. And at night, she slept in Alec's arms, safe and loved, and finally home. 6 months later, on a warm summer evening, Alec took her to dinner at an elegant restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. They ate and talked and laughed, and when dessert arrived, Alec reached across the table and took her hand. "Maggie Chen," he said, his voice serious but his eyes shining with emotion. "You marked the skin of killers, but it was you who marked my soul permanently. You made me want to be a better man, build a better life, and I can't imagine spending a single day without you by my side." He stood up, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Marry me. Be my partner, my wife, my everything, forever." Tears filled Maggie's eyes as she looked at this man who had entered her life as a dangerous stranger and become her everything. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Alec. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a simple but stunning diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the table. And then he pulled her into his arms, kissing her as the entire restaurant burst into applause. Later that night, lying together in Alec's bed, Maggie traced the scar on his shoulder, the reminder of the night they had taken down Volkov. "Do you regret it?" Alec asked softly. "Everything that happened, how your life changed?" Maggie considered the question. She had lost her old life, her independence, her anonymity. But she had gained so much more. Love, purpose, a family in the form of Connor and Tyler and the other men loyal to Alec. A chance to use her talents for something that mattered. "Not at all," she said finally, leaning in to kiss him. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Alec Donovan, and I wouldn't change anything." "Neither would I," Alec murmured against her lips. "Not a single thing." They married 3 months later, a small, intimate ceremony in the hills above Portland, with only their closest friends present. Connor was Alec's best man, and to Maggie's surprise, he cried during the vows. Tyler captured everything in photographs, and Maggie knew these images would join the thousands of others stored in her perfect memory, treasures she would carry forever. Life wasn't perfect. There were still dangers, still threats from enemies who wanted to bring down Alec and take what he had built. But together, they were stronger. Together, they could face anything. And as Maggie lay in her husband's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she knew she had finally found where she belonged. Not in a hidden tattoo studio, not living in the shadows and avoiding attention, but here, with this man who saw her, really saw her, and loved her for everything she was. She had marked the skin of countless people over the years, leaving permanent marks they would carry forever. But Alec had marked something much deeper. He had marked her soul, and she knew that mark would never fade. And she didn't want it to fade, because for the first time in her life, Maggie Chen wasn't just surviving. She was living, really living, and it was more wonderful than she ever could have imagined. Years later, when they had children, Maggie sometimes told them the story of how she and their father met. She left out the more violent parts, of course, softened the edges to make it suitable for young ears, but the essence remained the same. A story of two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who chose each other despite the obstacles, who built something beautiful from chaos. And when her children asked if she regretted leaving her old life behind, Maggie always gave the same answer. Not at all. Because sometimes, the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the person you least expect becomes the one you can't live without. Alec had entered her life as a dangerous stranger, a man with secrets and violence in his past. But he had become her husband, her partner, her love. And Maggie knew, with the same certainty with which she knew every detail of every tattoo she had ever done, that she would spend the rest of her life by his side, marking and being marked, loving and being loved. Because in the end, it wasn't the tattoos on the skin that mattered. It was the marks on the heart, the memories created together, the love that grew stronger with each passing day. And those marks, Maggie knew, would last forever. Life continued, bringing new challenges and new joys. Alec expanded his legitimate businesses, using the skills he had learned in the underworld to build an empire that helped instead of harmed. Maggie opened an art gallery, a place where tattoo artists could exhibit their work as the legitimate art it was. And together, they created a life that was rich in love and purpose. There were difficult moments, of course. Nights when Alec woke from nightmares about his past. Days when Maggie struggled with the memories of everything she had seen and experienced. But they faced those moments together, supporting each other, reminding each other that they had survived the worst and come out stronger. And there were moments of pure joy. The birth of their first daughter, a girl with Alec's dark eyes and Maggie's fierce spirit. The day their son took his first steps, toddling across the living room and straight into Alec's arms. Family vacations, quiet nights at home, the thousands of small moments that make up a shared life. Connor remained a constant presence in their lives, becoming honorary uncle to the children and the best friend anyone could ask for. Tyler, too, though he eventually settled down and started his own family, remained close, their children growing up together like cousins. And through it all, Maggie and Alec's love only grew stronger. They had begun in extraordinary circumstances, forged in the fire of danger and necessity. But they had built something lasting, something real, something that transcended the circumstances of their first meeting. Sometimes, late at night, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Alec would pull Maggie into his arms, and they would dance in the living room, with no music but the beating of their hearts. And in those moments, Maggie remembered the scared girl she had been, living in the shadows, hiding her talents, convinced she would never be anything more than a survivor. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth, who wasn't afraid to be seen, who had found her strength and her purpose. And all of it because of the man who held her, The man who had seen beyond her defenses to the real person underneath. The man who had loved her enough to help her become who she was meant to be. You marked the skin of killers, Alec murmured in her ear as they danced, repeating the words he had said when he proposed to her. But it was you who marked my soul permanently, and I'm grateful every day for it. Me too, Maggie whispered back, pressing closer to him. Me too, Alec. Because in the end, it wasn't about the tattoos or the secrets or the danger that had brought them together. It was about the love they had found, the love they had chosen, the love they would continue choosing every day for the rest of their lives. And that love, Maggie knew, was the most permanent mark of all. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, consider becoming a channel member to watch exclusive videos or send a super thanks. All donations made to the channel will be used for the creation of new stories. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue bringing quality content to you. Until the next story.